He talks about meeting Tias and the kind of online persona that he develops, okay, that he, everybody's pretending in online space. And this raises questions of what is our authentic individuality, our authentic identity. Are we the same person as we perform in our daily lives? Are we the same person as we perform on social media? And he says, I went by 100 different names. And throughout this novel, he talks about the ways in which he can play any kind of role that his clients want. And so he's always molding himself to other people's desires. And that should get us to think, well, what are his desires? What does he want as an individual outside of these demands of other people and the demands for survival? Okay? Then he talks about his father a little bit, and he says, you see, I never liked my birth name, Johnny. My parents named me after my dad, a residential school survivor, alcoholic, and would-be country star. And so there's another example of intersectionality that his father is defined or understood by him, at least, in certain types of roles in society. So where Johnny is a brown gay boy on the res, his father is a residential school survivor, an alcoholic, and a would-be country star, which trades in certain stereotypes, but also trades in the history of the residential schools. Okay? And he says, people don't forget those stories. Random people would ask me, oh, you're so-and-so's boy, the drunk, right? And so we can see that some of the stereotypes stick, right? Even within their own community, okay? That these roles that people get slotted into can be highly destructive, even if untrue. Okay? Then he talks about how he gets his name, Jonny Appleseed, and he talks about the Christian camp song. You've probably sung it. I won't torture you by singing it, right? But it's a kind of hymn or prayer in a biblical tradition. And he says, sounds dandy, right? Well, it was at the same camp that I kissed my first boyfriend. So, yeah, I think this is hilarious, right? And a lot of Indigenous literature is really funny. That here he is in a Christian camp, right? But that's where he has his first kind of boyfriend, his first homosexual experience, right? That the very institutions that historically have been against the same-sex union, same-sex coupling, is exactly the place where it happens to him. And so he's just pointing out the kind of contradictory logics that are often at place. But then how that comes back to haunt him in this renaming of Jonny Appleseed, that he's rotten to the core, as it were. And so we have this identity of the apple seed, referencing the Garden of Eden and apples and all that. Also the idea of it's a produce, that it's productive, it's something that grows. Okay, and he's saying at the same time, these very institutions that think about apples and growth and development and so forth can also vilify apples as rotten to the core and bad things. And then he goes into the history of Jonny Appleseed to say, why am I being slotted in with this history? It has nothing to do with me. This is a colonial history of the white, American folk hero. And here I am, being compared to this tradition, which is a really, destructive and violent tradition against my people. And he's like, I want to learn my own history. I want to learn about Louis Riel and Chief Peguis and Buffy St. Marie. That would be a real history lesson. And then he says, all I know is apples are crazy expensive on the res, and they've now become bad things in my head. And so this apple becomes kind of metaphor for him through his life. He says, my stepdad Roger called me an apple when I told him I wanted to leave the res. And he says, you're red on the outside and white on the inside. So the joke is the red skin of the Indian, right? But he's white on the inside, that he wants to change his identity, he wants to become a white person. So despite his outward appearance of the red Indian, he's contradictorily inside a white person. And so we get this conflict of identity. Okay, so just to summarize, this book is about the body, how Jonny uses the body for business. It's about intersectionality. How do we perform the identity that we are? And how do we do this in a contemporary Canadian literary setting that has this long tradition of snow and other kind of stereotypes of Canada, to do something quite different with this indigenous character and the performance of that identity. Okay. I will stop there.